Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening, afternoon, or good morning. In my case, it's good morning. In AJ's case, it is late afternoon, I believe. Is that right, AJ?
Correct.
Yeah, you are.
Yep, there is.
Cool. So I'm here with AJ, who is the Senior Director of Cyber Intelligence Strategy at Anomali. And AJ is going to talk to us all about Anomali, and we're very, very delighted to have him with us. And welcome, AJ. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Really, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. So I'm really excited to have a quick chat actually about how to build cyber intelligence programs. That's really the foundation of what I want to talk about today. I'll talk a little bit about ourselves and how we fit into the equation. I try to stay somewhat product agnostic in most of my discussions, but I'm also open to talk about the company and our offerings and how we fit in as well. So as you mentioned, my name's AJ Nash, and I'm the Senior Director of Cyber Intel Strategy. So for anybody wondering, I'll give you a quick background. I'm not, a computer scientist. I'm not a network engineer. I'm not a software designer or developer. I'm not really a ones and zeros cyber security folk. I'm a cyber intelligence guy and a traditional intel analyst. So about 18 years and change in the U.S. government space. Traditional intelligence, I spent half that time in uniform in the Air Force, the other half contracting, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, countering trafficking in persons, and chasing war criminals for a while in there, and then countering threats in cyberspace. Almost all that time was spent at Fort Meade, Maryland, so NSA, U.S. Cyber Command. I've been in the private sector now for about 5 years. And primarily my roles are either building intelligence programs or working with people on building intelligence programs. And here at Anomali, I still have the same function. I also oversee our intel team here, but my job is a lot of times working with folks on what intelligence is, why do we need it, how do we build programs, how are we successful with this? So I spent a lot of time talking to folks like yourself, and just sort of moving around. So I'm excited to be here today, and we're going to run through kind of a whirlwind on this. It's definitely a quick 101. There's certainly more depth we can talk about at another time, but let's jump into some slides. So let's see if, there we go, slides are going to work. All right, so the first thing that happens generally when I go to talk to folks, a lot of the same questions come up. Who are my adversaries and what are their motives? How are we preparing and are we under attack? And if so, have they been successful, and what, how do we respond? And often what's the damage comes in here as well. So these are a lot of conversations I have with CISOs and executives, and if they're being honest behind closed doors, the answer is usually I don't know to all those questions. So that's where we start most of our conversations about intelligence, is we need to know things, right? We need to get smarter. So in intelligence, essentially I like to talk to people about a couple of portions of this, right? First is, what are we solving for? Intelligence is a service that has to solve for something. The other one is, who are we serving? So what we're solving for, really there are three main categories. There's fear, there's data overload, and there's proactivity. So when we talk about fear, nobody wants to be in the news, right? SolarWinds is the latest example of that, but it could have been anybody, and it certainly will be others. Hang on a second, I had a malfunction. Let's go back. So nobody wants to be the next in the news, though, right? So there's a lot of fear. Fear can be really helpful sometimes. It can also be really harmful, right? So we have to be able to control people's fear. We want people to understand there's threats, understand the risk, and be prepared for that. So that helps us sometimes with driving budget and need. But we also don't want to be overwhelmed with fear. We have to be able to put things in context. We don't want to be spinning about everything we read and hear about. So intelligence helps us make sense of things a lot of times and separate things that we should be concerned about from things we really don't need to be worried about. Data overload is another big issue we have. If you go back, I don't know, say 10 years, a challenge was just getting enough. Understanding things was the next step, but really we needed to gather, and we were having a hard time finding everything we needed to understand. Now we're overwhelmed with data. That's not a problem. Our SIMs have tens of thousands of alerts every day. We've got all the news in the world, and we've got fake news, and we've got social media, and we've got open source intelligence, and we've got premium vendors, and we've got so much coming in that our challenge now is trying to make sense of it all. We need a lot of times technologies to help us do that. People are overwhelmed with what they get. They don't know what to believe and what not to believe, and therefore not sure what to take action against. And then the third piece is proactivity. So, we need to move consistently from a reactive to a proactive state. I'm going to talk about that a little more in a minute. But that's a challenge. Most organizations are living very reactive. They're still living on what's already happened to us and how do we respond to that. And we really need to drive to proactive. And the only way to do that is with intelligence. There's no other way to move that needle so that we understand things before they happen to us. then we talk about who we're serving, right? If you're going to build intelligence programs, as I said, this is a service business. We need to understand who we're serving and their needs. So there's basic categories. There's the technical tactical category. There's the operational category, and there's strategic. So tactical technical, that's hands-on keyboard, right? People who are in the weeds, getting things done, making us safer. We need to understand what their needs are, what resonates with them, what they're trying to accomplish, so we can give them what helps them, but also so we don't waste their time and energy on things they don't care about. SOC analysts, tier 1, tier 2 SOC analysts do not care about 30-page strategic reports about, Iran's plans for the next 5 years. It's just not going to resonate. They don't have time to read it. They got other things to do. Strategic on the other side, the executive leaders, for instance, they may be very interested in that. They may want to know how that's going to affect their business, how that's going to change the threat landscape, and what adjustments they should be making. They don't care much about the latest snort signature or the latest Yara rule. They're not worried about those things, right? They trust other people to get it done. And then in between, you got that operational layer. That's your management layer, who needs a bit on both sides so they can understand mostly, do we have the right people and the right technologies? Are we going the right direction? Do we have the right strategy in place to be successful? So it's really important to understand these three different areas, because we're building something for people. It doesn't do us any good if our customers can't consume what we're asking them to take on. And that happens if we misalign our thinking with what's actually needed. So before I go further, though, I do want to take a quick moment. We talk about interesting data and information and intelligence, and this is powerful. So this is from Joint Publication 2-0. As I mentioned, I'm out of the government space, and I believe in bringing as much of best practice from the government to the private sector. Intelligence has been a professionalized business in the government space for 5 decades now, 6 decades now. So it's important that we bring out what we know and what we can make sense of. So JP 2-0 is unclassified, published. Anybody can read it. Most of it's sort of boring, if I'm going to be honest. But this is an important document here. We're talking about the difference between data, information, and intelligence. And in the simplest form for us to understand data, if I give you a list of IPs and URLs, that's data. It's important, you're going to need it, but you don't really know much from that. If I give you that same list of IPs and URLs, but I add some sort of a threat score to it, I've added some context, that's information, that's informed data, it's contextualized. But intelligence is when we go a step further and we start talking about that infrastructure and saying, when was it dangerous? When was it safe? What actors have been associated with it? What tactics, techniques, and procedures have they been using? What are the signatures we should look for? And if possible, what do we think is coming next? So the reason I mention this is a challenge we have in the industry is organizations that are selling information and they're calling it intelligence. And a lot of customers are buying that. So that's a challenge we have to look for. There's a difference between whether we're consuming intelligence or whether we intend to actually create our own intelligence. But it's also important to make sure we know what we're buying and what we're going to get. When I say this, data and information are very important. They're the building blocks. You can't get to intelligence without them. But I often tell people there are vendors that will sell you data information, call it intelligence, and that would be the equivalent of me selling you bricks and saying I sold you a house. It's important to know what we're dealing with here, and that intelligence takes longer to develop. It's more complicated. It's more in depth. It's going to be based on a lot of data and information, and it's going to provide better answers. But there's not a lot of simple ways to get to intelligence. All right, so I talked about proactivity before, right? So why do we need intelligence? It's to move from that reactive to that proactive state. So in this slide, you see, a bomb in the middle of the screen there, right? So in the kinetic world, in the military, we used to talk about staying left of the boom. So here you've got your timeline of left to right. You got your boom in the middle, whether that's a terrorist attack or a bombing or whatever it might be, right? In cyber, hopefully it's something a little less carnage involved. But our goal is to be the left. So most organizations are way out here. They're far to the right. They're very reactive. Bad things have happened. They're discovering things in their space and they're trying to manage it and deal with it and fight it. And it's a difficult way of life, quite frankly. I'd say we're moving more in this direction, at least, where we're getting closer to the wire. People are finding things quicker. They're reacting faster. Some folks say they're proactive because it's inside our environment where we stopped it from getting far. So they're arguing that's a proactive state. I would say that's still reactive if it's inside of your environment, but we're getting better, right? The goal with intelligence is to move to the left. We want to be proactive. We want to know things before they get to us. We want to understand adversaries. We understand tactics and techniques. We understand trends outside of our environment. So ultimately, you're taking that external knowledge and you're providing that to internal defenders so they can make adjustments and changes. So when bad things get to us, they don't impact us. That's the goal of intelligence. And that is something only intelligence can do. There is no other function that helps us move to a proactive state other than intelligence-driven cybersecurity. Knowing what's going on elsewhere informs us and makes us better. Another key piece of this really quickly is that we need to make sure we're not too myopic when we talk about being proactive about intelligence. I know organizations who say, well, I'm a US bank, all I care about are threats to US banks. That's a great place to start, certainly valid, but we need to understand if you're a US bank, there's a compromise of a manufacturer in Asia, you need to know that too. Quite frankly, adversaries are the most green industry. They love to recycle. And once there's been a tactic or a technique or a tool that's made it out, they're going to look to try to use that in other places. So when we see attacks, when we see compromises, we do have to keep in mind that if it's different industry or different geography, it may still be a problem we should take a look at. All right. So next, we talked about what Intel is and why we need it. Now, where does it belong? And this is a little controversial, and there's some challenges to this one. People have different ideas on where Intel belongs, so I'm going to give you my opinion on where we need to look at it strategically. A lot of more organizations put CTI in their SOC right now. That's almost where everybody's putting it, frankly, mostly under the defensive cyber operations piece. It's going to be very tactical and technical, and you're going to have a hard time getting to a more proactive state. But the big challenge there is you're really limiting the impact you're going to have as an Intel organization. So if you take your Intel function, you drop it under defensive cyber operations, they're always going to care about what matters to their mission. And that makes sense. Any organization supports where they sit. So it's going to be a lot of very technical and tactical, as I said, a lot of Yara signatures and updating of patching and things of that nature, right? That's great and that's useful and that helps, but that's limiting and it is not getting full value from the investment that's going to happen in an intelligence program. And these are expensive to build normally. When you have intelligence going to the CISO, that gets you a more holistic vision. You have a chance to understand what the CISO is looking for, so you can start talking about the tactical through the strategic at that point, and really understanding the CISO's larger vision for security, or maybe even be a CSO, so you might bring in some physical security aspects as well. Ultimately, I think the intelligence team, we're not there yet as an industry, I don't know anybody doing this, but ultimately, I think you're going to talk about an Intel team that supports to the C-suite. That's when you're able to get into the large corporate goals and really drive strategic decisions for the company. An intelligence function shouldn't just be focused on your cybersecurity and your network defense. Intelligence can also work with your mergers and acquisitions, with your governance, risk, and compliance, with physical security, with insider threat, which ties you back to HR sometimes. There's a lot wider scope to an intelligence program, frankly. And again, for roughly the same investment, if you're going to spend the money on the talent and the tools and the accesses, you want to get the most bang for the buck. And the higher you move it up in the organization, the more opportunity you have to serve the entire enterprise. Now, that's the goal, that's the vision, that's the strategy I push. That doesn't mean on day one, you're going to build this massive program with this big team supporting everybody. You do want to start inside out. So, the SOC is definitely a primary customer of the Intel team. So I talked about, the what and the why and the where. Now let's talk a little bit more about the how of Intel. So this is the intelligence cycle. I didn't invent this, I'm straight out of the government space. Mine's a little prettier perhaps. But this is the foundation for how we build intelligence programs, right? Is you have to understand intelligence, and this is the intelligence cycle. It starts with planning and direction, then collection, processing, analysis, production, dissemination, and the feedback loop is that arrow at the back there. So planning and direction is the most important piece, and I'm going to get deeper into that in a minute. Because that's going to drive us forward. Collection talks about what we're going to bring in, processing talks about how we're going to do it, and really gets into sort of the weeds normally with technologies. Analysis and production is using best practices, analytic tradecraft and standards to build the intelligence products, which are normally written papers, but can be briefings and emails, lots of things can be an intelligence product. And then dissemination, you have to have a way to get intelligence to people. Intelligence doesn't serve anyone if they don't consume it. So it's important to have the ability to disseminate in a consistent manner. And again, there can be a lot of ways to do that. I've done dissemination through text. I've done it through messaging services, through emails, certainly through websites, portals. There's a lot of ways to do it as long as you have a consistent way of doing this. And then that feedback loop is really important because the only way we get better is if we are able to understand how we're doing. So That's the full cycle. Now, the big thing that people tend to fail is right here. I mentioned planning and direction. So most organizations I see struggle with Intel struggle right here. They often just skip this step altogether. They go from we don't have an Intel program to we need one, and they start right into collection. They start buying things. They start talking to vendors and buying accesses. But you need to spend the time and energy on planning direction. We need to sit down and figure out what our mission and our vision are. What are we going to do and where are we going to put it? Again, are we going to be defensive cyber operations and just be tactical technical? Or are we going to look bigger, right? And then we got to talk about our stakeholders. There's always the usual suspects, as I've already talked about, the SOC, and those are common things, red team, blue team, et cetera. But we need to be thinking bigger. And then the big key piece is intelligence requirements. Everything can't be number one important, because if everything is, nothing is. And Intel requirements informs planning. So, or collection planning, I should say. So the Intel requirements piece, you can't do that until you understand who you're going to serve. So I talked about stakeholders. So first we sit down and assess our stakeholders, build out a matrix to say, here's the organizations in the grand scheme, big picture, who we think we can support. We can prioritize those organizations. So we start inside out, and then we need to talk to those people. Intelligence is a communication business as much as it is a service. So we need to sit down and ask them, don't sit down and say, what are your intelligence requirements? They don't know, and they're going to say, that's your job to tell me. So what I often do is just sit down and say, tell me what you do. People love to talk about their jobs. Tell me what you do. Tell me what your responsibilities are. Tell me what your mission is. Tell me what your processes are. Tell me what technologies you're dependent on for your process to be successful. Tell me the data you're protecting and what technologies you're using there. Tell me what your crown jewels are, your golden nuggets, the things you have to protect to stay in business. And I do that business for business. I do that from inside the SOC all the way through every business line in a company that we're going to support. And with that, you start being able to craft intelligence requirements, per organization, but then you can normally see a lot of requirements that are across organizations. So you can blend those up into overall organizational requirements. Now you can start discussing collections, because now you're going to be able to figure out what you need. If you're a bank and you go organization for organization, your credit organization, your credit cards and your mortgages and your home loans and all these kind of, your car loans, all these kind of things. You're going to know that you need intelligence to help you with fraud, with ATM vulnerabilities and credit card vulnerabilities, with rewards programs, et cetera. There's a whole list of things. What you're also probably going to figure out pretty quickly is you don't really need a lot of intelligence on industrial control systems. So if there's a vendor who's big in industrial control, they may be the best at it, but you don't have to worry about buying them. They don't fit your needs. And you can start picking vendors that do. So this is where organizations fail. They don't take the time to do planning and direction, to understand who they're supporting and what those needs are, and then build a program that's going to best suit that. So I recommend people really pay attention on this side and build a strategy that's going to get you to this solution. So, all right, so I talked about the simple math of intelligence is the next piece. To me, intelligence is talent times access times time. And I'll be all honest, I mentioned I'm not a ones and zeros guy. I'm not a mathematician either. This used to say talent plus access plus time. And somebody pointed out to me that that's a flaw. These should be multiplications because it's zero in any category. There's a zero at the end. And it's true. So you have to have the right people. That's your talent. You also have to have something for them to work with. You can have amazing talent, but if you have no access, you're not going to get far. You can have amazing access, but if your talent's not very good, you're going to have lousy intel. And then you have to have a reasonable amount of time to get things done. Time's the hardest one. And what I always just tell people is understand, again, do you want it, good or fast or right? I mean, you're not going to get all of these things. Good, fast, or cheap, I believe, are the three. So you're not going to get all three of those. You get two of those three at best. So also don't always judge the intel you get based on how fast it is. First isn't the best metric for measuring value of intelligence. The intel needs to be timely, but it also needs to be relevant and it needs to be accurate. All right, so talent, access, and time, though, is the math we talked about. So on the talent side, I see a few different ways to build programs. You can do it with all your talent internal. You have great control over your people. You have great visibility. You can help them really align to what your needs are. Costs a lot of money. And you're gonna have a hard time with retention. There's a lot of challenges in our industry. We talk about shortages of cybersecurity talent, but our shortage of cyber intelligence talent is even greater. So that's a challenge for us. A lot of organizations say, we'll just outsource everything. We just want somebody to give us intel back. That's great. It can cut down your costs, but you lose your control and you lose some of the visibility of what's going on. It's hard to get external organizations to focus on your needs because that's a matrix approach. They have several different clients they're working with. So the intelligence may not be what you're looking for. I believe in the hybrid approach. I believe in a small cadre of strong intel people that can support our needs and really focus on our stakeholders and our engagement and building our requirements, and can also hold the outside vendors accountable. This reduces our challenges in terms of cost and hiring a bit and turnover, but we can still meet all of our needs. Now, the part that gets a little controversial for some is when you build an intel program, I'm of a strong mind that you need to have the leader of that program have an intelligence background. One of the key fundamental problems we see, besides organizations who don't take the time to do planning and direction and make sure they understand their stakeholders and their needs, is they put the wrong person in charge of their program. It's all well-meaning. A lot of times people want to build an intel program, so they say, we're going to do this. We've got this guy or gal over here who's been just amazing at what they're doing. They're a great manager, great leader. You're the best incident responder we have, and now you're the new director of intelligence. Unfortunately, intelligence is a different job. It's a different career field. And that person can be very smart and very motivated and very hardworking. And more often than not, they're going to build themselves another incident response team. You're going to end up with a team that says it's cyber intelligence, but it's really still technically, tactically focused. It's all about IOCs and signatures, and it can't move beyond that. And it struggles to provide what people are looking for from an intel team. And that's a real challenge. And sometimes I've seen people who moved from a job they were very successful at and through this promotion into a position they weren't a good fit for, and then they had to go find something else to do. So I think it's very important that the person running the intel program has an intelligence background. Ideally, somebody who's actually been out of the government a few years. The transition can be challenging, so it's better if you let somebody else break them in. But somebody who understands foundations of intelligence and the real career field that we're talking about, and can speak technology at least at a reasonable level, and understands the needs of customers and knows how to leverage more technical folks as well. So another piece with talent, we talked about Anomali, Tradecraft, and Standards briefly. I mentioned it. So I'm gonna go a little deeper into that. I happen to be a big believer in the U.S. Intelligence Community Directives, the ICDs. That's unclassified and published as well. There's hundreds of them, like 800 of them. Most of them are pretty boring. I don't recommend reading them. But ICD 203, 206, and 208, I find to be very important. Combined, they're only a handful of pages. And they really help people understand the language of intelligence. Again, we're in a communication business. They're interested in a high or medium and a low confidence assessment, understanding the variety and the quality and the reliability of sourcing. There's some other key points in here. But it's important because of miscommunication with intelligence can be really damaging. Right now, I've learned in a lot of organizations, if I tell somebody I have a low confidence assessment based on limited intelligence that nation state X is going to attack us, or I have a high confidence assessment based on a large body of intelligence that nation state X is going to attack us, most leaders only heard nation state X is going to attack us. We haven't done a good enough job of explaining the chasm between those two statements I just made. So I believe in using community directives because it gives us a standard for doing intelligence that's repeatable, that's trainable, that's teachable. It's also something we can help teach our customers what we mean when we say there's a low or a medium or a high confidence assessment, and what their response is likely to be as a result, what they need to do with it. So I'm a big believer in these standards, even writing an analytic tradecraft paper that you can document how you're going to use your standards. Another thing that goes along with what we're doing here now is access, right? So I'm going to talk a little about vendor access in a minute, but first I want to talk about some internal access and dependencies we have. Crown jewels assessment. Most organizations don't have much confidence in having a crown jewels assessment. And this is a big challenge for us because intelligence, again, I'm looking externally, but even if we're able to say there is a dedicated adversary with a specific interest in a system that we own, or in our industry, or in our geography, that we're worried about, and then I'm forced to ask, what do we do about this, right? And people have been known to come back and say, well, all right, you've told me there's this threat, but how does it impact us? Well, the crown jewels assessment should help me understand that. Do we even have this system? If we do, where do we have it located? What version are we on? What data are we, connected to this system? So what risk are we looking at? But most organizations can't do that. So if I tell you there's a threat against a specific, server type, if you can't tell me how many versions of that you have and where they're located and what data is tied to them, I can't tell you how important this is to us. It could be we don't even have that server, available to us. We don't have that operating system, let's say. So we don't care. We can tell people this is a dangerous thing, but not our problem. But if we do, and we've got crown jewels tied to it, we've got some of our best data in the company, things that'll put us out of business, then that changes the risk and it changes our response. So it's really important to have a solid crown jewels assessment, and the Intel team has to have access to that so they can match the threats external to what's going on inside our environments. Also, a configuration management database. So this is kind of tied to that, right? Crown jewels tells us where the most important things are. The CMDB tells us, versions and what's going on. So these are really interconnected, which is why I started speaking to it already. Again, about relevance and prioritizing intelligence. I need to understand what my environment looks like. So when we look outside and we bring in those threats and we match them up, we can figure out what matters. We can provide assessments and recommendations to people who actually have to take action. The Intel team is not going to fix the problems. That's not what we do. We're not in operations, but we're going to inform people who have to make those decisions and make those choices. Maybe it's just telling leadership so they can take on more risks. They understand what they're dealing with. But you need to know what your internal environment looks like and really understand it. When I get on stage and talk to people about CMDBs and I ask who's confident in their CMDB, everybody just sort of chuckles and laughs, mostly uncomfortably. But the result's the same. People haven't been fixing these problems in a lot of cases. And if you're doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're just waiting to have a problem. And even though intelligence might tell you how to solve a problem, you didn't know it was yours to begin with, so you don't do anything, and eventually you're going to be held accountable for it. So I'm a strong believer in a CMDB that is up to date and used properly, and patching prioritization and schedules that are kept up, and a crown jewels assessment so we know where our most important assets are. And then the last piece is the SIM, or if you're using managed services, access to that data as well. Again, that's connecting external and internal. We can talk about adversaries externally. We also talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures. I mentioned different signatures, et cetera. If we can connect our intelligence to what we're seeing come across our network, we can provide context. And there's technologies to do that in real time. We have to provide some of those as a company so that when you get those 10,000 alerts a day from Splunk, what am I going to work on first? Well, if I'm able to have real-time connection of those alerts to my intelligence knowledge base to say this alert matters more to us because this ties to an adversary that we know has a particular interest in our company or in our industry or in our geography, we change the prioritization on how we work on those things. So it's important to connect the internal, external together, and that includes down to the technical level. All right, so the last thing is bringing it all together. This is what it looks like, right? This is the system essentially. So I talked about access. That's all your top here. This is just a snapshot. There's more, of course, of different vendors, also open source, vendors that focus on brand or social media, actors, deep and dark web, technical. You need to bring in a lot. And, in some cases, you'd argue there's no such thing as having too much collection if you have the right technology. And that's true. Of course, budget becomes a factor. You don't want to double and triple down on the same silo of intelligence and not work in other areas. But you need a wide swath of intelligence. And that leads to technology. So this is where our company comes in. It's the only slide where I really talk about us, is where a threat intelligence platform fits in our case, Anomali Threat Stream. Brings all of this together. We also have 140 some odd feeds out of the box that go into our platform. And make sense of it. We have machine learning, which our system is called Macula, and we have data scientists that can go in depth on that. And it's not smoke and mirrors. It really works. I used to be a customer before I joined the company, so I can vouch to that. But we make sense of these things. We dedupe things. We're able to provide threat scores and context. So now you're getting into intelligence, right? Not data or information, and get it into one spot. You also have a workplace, so you can do your investigations and you can build out your intelligence reports in that same workspace. And then we tie to your SIM, or in our case, we also have Anomali Match, which is another product that works with a SIM. And that's how you tie your intelligence, as I said, the context with your SIM, right? So you're able to do that in real time. And that works back and forth so that we can both, we can work in real time, but we also can do retrospective very quickly. And we can tie to source, so we can actually do actions on your intelligence. And that goes downstream, as you can see there, and your intelligence team in the top. The third piece we have is a product called Anomali Lens. It's a really important piece for speeding up research and allowing people to have context of what they're reading on the internet, whether they're executives trying to read the news and make sense of it, or whether they're intelligence professionals trying to quickly do analysis and bring things into their environment that they can work on. So that's where our team fits into the equation. And with that, that's it. So as I said, this is a quick run through on how to build effective intelligence programs. There's a lot more. We can certainly talk at length, or another presentation we can get together again, or I can talk to whomever is interested. There's my contact information. As I said, I'm Senior Director of Cyber Intel Strategy at Anomali, and I'm happy to be here. I think I got a couple minutes. We can do some quick Q&A.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, AJ. It was really, it was a fantastic presentation. Packed for the content there. One question I have is, do you guys also check hardware?
Do we check hardware as a company?
Yeah. I mean, I know that you're all about intelligence. I mean, do you kind of advise about hardware as well?
I guess it depends on how you're looking at it, right? So as a company, we're a platform company, so we provide the technologies for people to do all the things we were just talking about, right? I do have a small Intel team within our company. Yeah. Primarily, we're focused on doing some impactful intelligence that we put out publicly on a number of topics, and it could be threats against cloud, it could be threats against hardware, it could be things like supply chain, for instance, or mobile malware, or the latest tactics or trends in threat. But as a company, we're more focused on providing the technologies that unify people's access and pull things together. So if there were specific threats against hardware, for instance, that would come from probably one of our premium Intel vendors that then ties into the platform. And our job is to connect that to everything else that we have access to. So we certainly have that capability, but it would come from the vendor space usually.
Okay. What? How do you put budgets? So if a client comes to you, how do you kind of quantify everything and put a metric on it?
Good question. So yeah, I'm kind of going to break that into two, actually. So budget's a good one, right? First, we talk about how do you build an Intel program? How do I explain to leadership that we need this and what it's going to cost? And there's a lot of expense, right? And there's two challenges to this. So the first piece is making sure people understand proactivity, as I mentioned earlier, right? The only way to get proactive is through intelligence, and we have to really explain that to leadership. If you want to become proactive, it's an intelligence-driven solution. This takes time, effort, and money to build. Otherwise, you're always going to live on just reacting to things that are already happening to you. The other one is I've sat down in the past to build out a full mission and vision and a strategy, and we talk about the wide range of folks we're going to be able to serve. And then with that, we're able to be honest and assess what it's going to cost. But a lot of times you want to be able to tie that back to what the value is going to be, right? How are we going to reduce risks? You want to tie it to risk scoring if you can. How are we going to make the company more efficient so you can cut costs as well a lot of times, which you can do with intelligence programs. But you really need to build out that full vision and mission and work at leadership to explain the value of Intel. And sometimes you can leverage a little bit of that fear as well. None of these folks want to end up on the news, right? And we could talk about organizations that have had failures and how they would not have had that problem had they had an intelligence program. And you can also normally capture some success stories. There's a fair amount out there to say, this is how intelligence prevented terrible things from happening and what we can do. And then from there, if you're able to build out some understanding of your stakeholders and your Intel requirements, you can start estimating what kind of intelligence you're going to need to make all of this work and get estimates on vendors and be able to build out a budget to go with that. From a metric standpoint, I mentioned a little bit, that's the back end. You have an intelligence program. Now you want to start aligning the intelligence you're paying for against your intelligence requirements to figure out who's providing you the best intelligence and what's working for you, and be able to capture success stories. When did intelligence change what we did to make us safer? And you start pulling those in and building that up and work with your risk team. I like working with governance, risk, and compliance to talk about risk measurements and how you're lowering risk because there are associated numbers with that justify budget. Cool.
I think that definitely answered it. And my last question is, what's the future of Anomali? Is there something you can share with us for your vision for this year, next year, and onwards?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, I'm really excited about where we are as a company and where we're going. Our suite of tools are incredibly useful. We've got a great growth as a business. We've got a fantastic base right now, and we're growing. Our customer satisfaction ratings are fantastic as well. So I'm excited about where we're going. I don't want to give away too much on the roadmap, obviously. We do have some really impressive features coming out that are going to make our platform more unified, make our systems work even better together. They're already designed to work together very well, but I think we're going to do more in that space. We have some partnership relationships working on, which will be very interesting when they come out. We're working a little bit more on some automation. We're always trying to make things easier for the user. And the other thing we're going to be doing more of this year that I think people are going to see is we're going to be contributing more to the intelligence discussions that are going on in our community, right? Our intelligence team is going to be producing more intelligence and also having an opportunity to have more discussions with people about how to build their programs, how to take advantage of platforms like ours, and be more efficient and more effective. And one of the things we're really focused on is pushing towards helping people who are moving into that fusion center model, right? The SOC model is what exists. Fusion center is kind of the newer thing coming on board, which is again that wider scope we talked about. We have a platform that's well designed for that because of some of the ways we're set up on trusted circles and sharing. That we can have large groups that work really well together in our platform. So I think we're going to help a lot of folks push that envelope into the fusion space, which I think is really important, especially as I expect we're going to continue to have a very diverse workspace for a long time. Listen, I think COVID will eventually end, but I think a lot of folks are going to stay dispersed, and that creates a different environment. And we have technologies that are really well set up to handle that shift to permanent, remote work, I think.
Okay. That's it. Fantastic. Thanks very much for your time, AJ. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely, Henry. Thanks for having me. I'd come back anytime. We can talk about other things if you'd like.
Definitely. Cool. Take care. Thanks again.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Cheers.